In the shadowed vaults of eternity, where crowns are forged from forgotten blood, a single drop can shatter thrones built on deception. The grand hall of Castle Eldridge echoed with the murmur of silk and silver, a symphony of ambition veiled in candlelight. Nobles from the fractured realms of the old world had gathered, their daughters arrayed like offerings on an altar of marble and velvet. Lady Alara Voss, 28 and weary from the weight of her lineage, stood among them, her skin pale as the frost-kissed windows that framed the stormy night outside. Born in the crumbling estates of the northern moors, Alara had been shaped by loss, her mother taken by a fever that whispered of curses, her father lost to the endless wars that scarred the borders between human domains and the shadowed enclaves of the undead. She dreamed not of power, but of escape, her heart a fragile vessel cracked by disillusionment, yearning for a dawn that never came. The air hung heavy with the scent of beeswax and wilted roses, petals scattered across the floor like the remnants of innocence sacrificed. Whispers rippled through the assembly. The vampire king was coming. Victor Draven, eternal sovereign of the Crimson Throne, whose reign spanned centuries of blood and betrayal. He was no mere predator. He was a relic of antiquity, born in the shadowed crypts of ancient Rome, turned in the chaos of imperial fall by a lover whose name he had long since buried under layers of guilt. Immortal, yes, but haunted. Solitary in his ethics, for he refused the mindless slaughter that defined his kind, choosing instead a vigil of restraint that isolated him further. His desire was not conquest, but redemption, a quiet ache to mend the fractures of his endless nights. Yet the nobles schemed, parading their heirs as brides to secure alliances, to bind the king's power to their fragile mortal lines. Ilara's fingers trembled as she adjusted the crimson gown that clung to her like a second skin, its fabric whispering against the scars hidden beneath, marks from a childhood raid, when raiders from the immortal borders had left her family in ruins. She was no virgin prize, no untouched flower. She was broken, her spirit frayed by abandonment, her body weakened by a lingering illness that sapped her vitality, leaving her breaths shallow and her eyes shadowed. Why had her father insisted she come? For the family, he had said, his voice brittle with desperation, as if selling her soul could rebuild their fallen house. The great doors groaned open, admitting a gust of wind that carried the metallic tang of rain and something darker, earth turned by ancient hands. Victor entered not with fanfare, but with the deliberate grace of a shadow detaching from the wall. Tall, his frame cloaked in black velvet, embroidered with threads of faded gold, his eyes gleamed like polished obsidian under the chandelier's flicker. The hall fell silent, breaths held as if the very air feared his touch. He scanned the assembly, his gaze lingering not on the poised debutantes with their practiced smiles, but on the edges, where the light faltered. There, in the alcove half-shrouded by heavy drapes, stood Isolde, not one of the noble's daughters, but a Dhampir without clan, a half-breed anomaly, 25 years in the mortal coil, her veins a turbulent mix of human frailty and vampiric fire. Born to a mortal healer and a rogue vampire who vanished into the mists after her conception, Isolde had wandered the fringes of both worlds, rejected by the purebloods for her diluted essence and pitied by humans for the hunger that gnawed at her edges. Her skin was luminous, almost translucent, marked by a faint scar along her collarbone, a silver crescent from a ritual gone awry, a symbol of her divided soul. She had come not as a contender, but as a shadow advisor to a lesser lord, her presence tolerated only because her senses pierced the veils others could not. Disillusioned by betrayal, lovers who feared her thirst, allies who used her gifts only to discard her, Isolde sought no crown, only survival, her heart armored against the inevitability of isolation. Victor's steps faltered as his eyes met hers. The room seemed to contract, the candle flames leaning toward him like supplicants. He moved not toward the throne prepared at the hall's center, nor the line of daughters, but straight to the alcove. Gasps rippled through the nobles as he approached Isolde, his boots echoing softly on the stone. She straightened, her dark hair cascading like midnight over her shoulders, her emerald eyes narrowing in wary defiance. The scar at her throat pulsed faintly, a beacon in the dim light. "You," he murmured, his voice a low timbre that resonated like distant thunder carrying the weight of centuries. It was not a command, but an acknowledgement, laced with a vulnerability that belied his crown. The air between them thickened, charged with the unspoken, the pull of blood calling to blood, yet tempered by something deeper, a recognition of shared solitude. Isolde's breath caught, her hand instinctively rising to the silver pendant at her neck, an heirloom from her vanished father, a simple ring etched with thorns, symbolizing the eternal bind of love and pain. "I am no prize for your court, king," she replied, her tone steady but laced with the tremor of one who had learned to guard her fractures. The illness that plagued her, a slow poison from her hybrid nature, manifesting as feverish nights and visions of blood, made her voice huskier, more intimate. The nobles shifted uneasily, their whispers rising like steam from a cauldron. Lady Alara watched from her place, her heart pounding in a rhythm that echoed the distant rain. She had heard tales of the king's mercy, how he spared villages in the border wars, negotiating truces where others sowed slaughter. But this? A king kneeling? Victor lowered himself before Isolde, his knee touching the cold floor with a reverence that silenced the hall. The candlelight danced across his face, illuminating lines etched by guilt, the memory of battles lost, of a kingdom torn by political intrigue and the endless cycle of betrayal. "I seek no prize," he said, his gaze never leaving hers. "I seek the one who sees the shadows I cast. In you, I find the mirror to my own divided soul." Isolde's fingers tightened on the ring, its thorns pricking her skin, drawing a bead of blood that gleamed like a ruby in the low light. The death that shadowed all immortals and half-lives like hers hovered in that moment, invisible but palpable, whispering of choices yet to be made. Love, resisted and inevitable, stirred in the space between them, a curse wrapped in redemption. As the first toll of midnight echoed from the tower bells, Alara felt a chill seep into her bones, the weight of unseen eyes upon her own fragile form. What secrets did this Dhampir hold that could unmake a crown? And in the king's kneel, what doom awaited the daughters prepared for a throne now turned away? The storm outside Castle Eldridge raged like a beast unchained, its fury lashing the ancient stones with sheets of rain that blurred the world beyond the arched windows. Inside, the grand hall held its breath, the nobles frozen in a tableau of shattered expectations. Candle flames guttered in the draught, casting elongated shadows that twisted across the marble floor like veins of doubt. Victor's knee remained pressed to the cold stone, his form a monolith of black velvet and restrained power, while Isolde stood before him, her emerald eyes wide with the shock of a revelation she had neither sought nor foreseen. She could feel the weight of every gaze upon her, the nobles' daughters, their silks rustling like dry leaves in autumn, their faces pale masks of envy and fear. Lady Alara, positioned at the periphery, clutched the folds of her crimson gown, her shallow breaths sinking with the distant thunder. The illness that clawed at Alara's insides, a relentless fever born of the moor's poisoned mists, made the scene swim before her eyes. She had come here expecting a transaction, a bartering of flesh for fortune. But this unfolding drama whispered of deeper currents, of fates intertwined beyond the reach of mortal ambition. Isolde's hand hovered near the silver pendant at her throat, the thorn-etched ring warm against her skin from the bead of blood it had drawn. The prick was a fleeting pain, yet it anchored her amid the whirlwind of emotions surging through her hybrid veins. "Rise, my lord," she whispered, her voice a thread of silk strained by the hunger that forever simmered within her. Not the ravenous thirst of full vampires, but a subtler torment, a fever that blurred the line between desire and decay, leaving her nights haunted by visions of crimson rivers and forgotten embraces. Born in the shadowed fringes of a border village, where her mother's herbs could not fully quell the paternal curse, Isolde had learned early that survival demanded walls around the heart. Lovers had come and gone, drawn to her ethereal beauty only to recoil from the chill of her touch, the way her eyes gleamed unnaturally in the dark. She desired connection, yes, a tether to the warmth she could never fully claim, but trust was a luxury she had long relinquished. Victor lifted his gaze, those obsidian eyes holding hers with an intensity that pierced the armor she had forged from years of rejection. Centuries had etched their toll upon him. The fall of Rome, where he had been a soldier turned by the desperate kiss of a dying consort, her blood mingling with his in a ritual of unintended eternity. Guilt clung to him like the velvet of his cloak, guilt for the wars he had waged to unify the fractured immortal realms, for the betrayals that splintered his court, purebloods scheming against his ethical edicts that forbade the wanton drain of human life. He had built the Crimson Throne on restraint, negotiating fragile peaces with mortal kings while his own kind whispered of weakness. Solitude was his crown's cruelest jewel, until this moment when the Dhampir's presence stirred a recognition deeper than bloodlust, a mirror to his own fractured existence, half shadow, half light. "I kneel not in submission," he said, his voice resonating through the hall like the low hum of a distant bell, "but in truth. The nobles offer daughters forged in the fires of politics, but you carry the echo of what I once was, torn between worlds, seeking redemption in the spaces between." He rose slowly, his movements fluid yet deliberate, the air between them humming with unspoken possibilities. The scent of rain-soaked earth clung to him, mingling with the faint, metallic tang of his immortal essence, a perfume that made Isolde's pulse quicken against her will. The assembly stirred, murmurs swelling into a tide of indignation. Lord Voss, Ilara's father, stepped forward, his face flushed beneath the powdered wig, the lines of war and worry carving deep furrows. "This is madness, sire. The alliances, the borders demand a union of pure lines. She is no noble. She is tainted." His words hung heavy, laced with the desperation of a man whose house teetered on ruin, his daughter's fragile health a silent plea for the security a royal match might bring. Victor's head turned fractionally, his expression unchanging, but a shadow of sorrow flickered in his eyes. "Taint is the lie of the pure, Lord Voss. It is the division that weakens us all." He extended a hand to Isolde, not grasping, but offering, a gesture heavy with the philosophy of his endless nights. In the quiet of his crypts, he had pondered the beauty of mortal suffering, how it illuminated the soul where immortality dulled it. To choose eternity was to forego that raw edge, yet here, in her, he glimpsed a bridge. Love as both curse and salvation, resisted yet inexorable. Isolde hesitated, her fingers brushing the ring once more. The thorns bit deeper now, a ritual of her own making, drawing another drop of blood that traced a warm path down her collarbone, staining the lace of her bodice like a forbidden sigil. The scar there, the silver crescent from a botched binding rite in her youth, when a clan's elder had tried to purge her impurity, throbbed in sympathy, a reminder of choices that had scarred her body and soul. She had rationalized solitude as strength, convinced that no bond could withstand the hybrid storm within her. Yet Victor's proximity ignited something primal, a warmth that battled the chill of her illness, visions flickering at the edges of her sight. Shared eternities, battles fought side by side against the encroaching wars that threatened both realms. She placed her hand in his, the contact electric, her skin feverish against the cool marble of his palm. Gasps echoed anew, but she ignored them, drawn into the intimacy of his gaze. "What do you see in me that your throne does not provide?" she asked, her voice intimate, laced with the philosophical undercurrent of one who had stared into the abyss of her own divided nature. "Redemption," he replied simply, his thumb tracing the back of her hand, a touch that spoke of textures unspoken, of velvet nights and the soft give of candle wax under flame. "And, perhaps, the end of my isolation." As they stood there, the hall's heavy drapes billowed in another gust, extinguishing several candles in a cascade of smoke and dying light. Alara watched, her heart a drumbeat of envy and foreboding, the fever rising in her chest like a tide. The death that shadowed all, immortal vigil or mortal frailty, loomed larger now, invisible threads pulling at the fabric of the night. But in the king's grasp, Isolde felt the first crack in her resistance, a whisper of inevitability that promised transformation even as it heralded peril. From the shadowed balconies above, unseen eyes gleamed, spies from rival clans, whispers of political intrigue already weaving their webs. What betrayal brewed in the crimson depths of the throne, and would Isolde's choice ignite a war that no knell could quell? The midnight bell tolled again, deeper, resonant, as if the castle itself mourned the fragile dawn of something eternal. The rain's relentless assault on Castle Eldridge had softened to a mournful patter, each drop tracing silvery paths down the leaded panes like tears unshed by the stone itself. In the grand hall, the air thickened with the acrid bite of extinguished candles, their wisps of smoke curling upward like specters fleeing the dawn of an unforeseen alliance. Victor's hand enveloped Isolde's, a cool anchor against the feverish pulse that raced beneath her skin, the contact sending ripples of unwelcome warmth through her divided core. She withdrew slowly, not in rejection, but in the instinctive recoil of one who had learned that touch often preceded abandonment. The thorn-etched ring on its silver chain swung gently against her chest, its pricks a ritual reminder. Love's bind was ever a wound, drawing blood to seal the pact. The noble's murmurs crested into a wave of protest, silk skirts whispering like conspirators as they clustered closer to the throne's empty dais. Lord Voss's face, etched with the scars of border skirmishes, deep gashes from a vampire raid that had claimed half his regiment, twisted in outrage. He had dragged Alara here across mud-churned roads, her frail form bundled against the chill that exacerbated her illness, a wasting sickness born of tainted wells in their moor's estate. At 28, Alara was no stranger to despair. Orphaned in spirit, if not in name, her father's ambitions had long overshadowed her quiet dreams of a healer's life, free from the court's gilded cages. Now, as she watched the king and the Dhampir, a pang of something sharper than envy pierced her, a recognition of her own invisibility, her body a vessel too cracked for even the lowliest bidder. Victor released Isolde's hand, turning to face the assembly with the measured poise of one who had stared down legions in forgotten wars. His voice cut through the din, resonant and unyielding, carrying the timbre of ancient oaths sworn in torchlit crypts. This night was convened for unity, not barter. The Crimson Throne stands not on the purity of bloodlines, but on the choices that forge them anew. Isolde bears no clan, yet in her flows the truth of our shared shadows, the human spark that immortals have forsaken at their peril. Isolde stepped back into the alcove's embrace, the heavy drapes brushing her shoulders like a lover's hesitant caress. Her mind reeled, rationalizing the pull she felt toward him as mere illusion, a trick of her hybrid senses amplifying the king's aura. She had spent her years on the fringes, mediating fragile truces between mortal villages and rogue undead. Her gifts, heightened sight in the gloom, a resilience to silver that full vampires envied, tools for survival rather than seduction. Betrayals had layered her solitude, a human suitor who had branded her a monster upon discovering her thirst, a vampire elder who had promised sanctuary only to exploit her visions of enemy movements in the escalating border conflicts. Desire stirred now, unbidden, a philosophical ache. Could this eternal sovereign, marked by his own guilt from centuries of restrained conquests, offer the redemption she had denied herself? Or was it the curse of her blood, dooming any bond to the grave's slow creep? From the balcony's gloom, a figure detached, a cloaked envoy from the rival House of Thorn, pure-blood schemers whose political machinations had fueled half the realm's wars. His eyes, pale as frost on a raven's wing, narrowed at the scene below, fingers twitching toward a concealed dagger etched with runes of severance. Betrayal brewed in such shadows, whispers of a coup that would unseat Victor for his weakness, allying instead with mortal lords hungry for immortal might. The envoy slipped away, his footsteps muffled by the storm's dying rumble, leaving only the echo of intrigue in the air. Ilara, emboldened by the fever's haze that blurred propriety, approached the alcove, her steps faltering on the uneven marble. The crimson gown clung damply to her frame, accentuating the hollows of her cheeks, the pallor that spoke of nights spent coughing blood into embroidered handkerchiefs. "Sire," she ventured, her voice a fragile thread woven with the desperation of the forsaken. "If not for alliances of blood, then what of mercy? My house crumbles under debts from the last war, your wars, they say, though you spared our fields." Her eyes, shadowed by disillusionment, met Victor's, pleading not for a crown, but for the dignity her illness had stripped away. Victor's gaze softened, a flicker of his ancient sorrow surfacing, the memory of a mortal life lost to eternity's maw, where every choice echoed with the what-ifs of death deferred. He had knelt before Isolde, not from impulse, but from the inexorable logic of his vigil. Immortals, once humans who chose not to die, now teetered on the edge of their own obsolescence, wars raging as pure-blood factions rebelled against his edicts of coexistence. In Isolde, he saw the bridge, her Dhampir essence a testament to love's defiant persistence across divides. "Mercy is no currency, Lady Ilara," he replied, his tone compassionate yet firm, laced with the philosophy of endless nights. "It is the light we carry into shadow, transforming suffering into something eternal. Your pain, it mirrors the fractures I seek to heal." Isolde watched the exchange, her hand drifting to the ring once more. The thorns drew fresh blood, a warm rivulet tracing her skin, its metallic scent mingling with the hall's beeswax and rain. A vision assailed her then, a ritual revelation, unbidden, the two of them in a candlelit chamber. Victor's wrist offered in a binding of blood and vow, her choice between embracing eternity's chill or succumbing to her illness's mortal pull. The image shattered as thunder rolled anew, but the dilemma lingered, heavy as the velvet drapes. Love, she rationalized, was the ultimate betrayal, of self, of safety, yet its inevitability burned brighter than any flame. As the assembly dispersed into uneasy clusters, Victor drew Isolde aside, his presence a shield against prying eyes. "Walk with me," he murmured, guiding her toward a side door that led to the castle's labyrinthine corridors. The wood-paneled halls enveloped them in intimacy, torchlight flickering across tapestries depicting ancient battles, vampiric legions clashing with human phalanxes, thorns of betrayal piercing crowns. Their footsteps echoed in cadence, slow and introspective, the air textured with the musty scent of aged stone and unspoken confessions. In a secluded antechamber, lit by a single candelabrum whose flames danced like hesitant spirits, Victor paused before a gilded mirror, its surface warped by time. Isolde joined him, her reflection fractured beside his unchanging form, a poignant emblem of their world's collision. "Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die," he said, his voice a low caress against the silence. "But in you, I see the choice renewed, to live fully or fade into the half-light." His fingers brushed her scar, the silver crescent cool under his touch, igniting a spark of transformation that warred with her resistance. She turned to him, emerald eyes gleaming with the sheen of unshed tears, the fever within her rising like a tide. "And if that choice demands, I surrender the humanity that keeps me whole?" The question hung between them, a moral precipice, as the distant toll of a bell marked the night's deepening. Outside, the envoy's shadow merged with the mist-shrouded gardens, a missive already en route to Thorn's distant spires. The king's folly with the clanless Dhampir would ignite the long-feared war, alliances shattering like fragile glass. But in the antechamber's glow, Isolde felt the curse of inevitability coil tighter. Love as redemption's blade, poised to cut or to heal. What price would she pay when the shadows demanded their due? And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these immortal confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The antechamber's single candelabrum cast a trembling aureole of gold across the warped mirror, its light fracturing into prisms that danced like elusive memories on the thorn-etched ring dangling from Isolde's chain. Victor's touch lingered on her silver crescent scar, cool as the breath of forgotten crypts, yet it ignited a fire in her veins that warred with the fever's insidious creep. She stepped back, the wooden floor creaking beneath her like a sigh from the castle's ancient bones, the air thick with the scent of melting wax and the faint, earthy musk of rain-soaked stone seeping through the cracks. Her heart, that treacherous hybrid organ, pounded in a rhythm both mortal and eternal, echoing the distant patter of droplets against the leaded windows. "Why me?" Isolde's voice emerged as a whisper, laced with the raw edge of her illness. A huskiness born of nights when thirst clawed at her throat, blurring visions of crimson feasts with the ache of unquenched longing. She had rationalized such encounters before, dismissing them as echoes of her divided blood, a siren's call to bridge the chasm she could never fully cross. Born in the mist-veiled hollows of a border hamlet, where her mother's herbal poultices masked the paternal curse only so long, Isolde had forged her solitude from necessity. At 25, her traumas layered like scars, the abandonment by a father who fled the scandal of his mortal dalliance, the betrayal of a human village that drove her out after a fevered night revealed her fangs in delirium. She desired not thrones, but a quiet absolution, a way to temper the shadow within without surrendering the fragile light of her humanity. Yet here, in Victor's gaze, that desire twisted into something inevitable, a philosophical snare. Love as the ultimate ritual, demanding she choose between erosion and rebirth. Victor's obsidian eyes held hers, unblinking, the lines of centuries etching subtle sorrow across his brow, marks from the imperial sands of Rome where he had first tasted eternity's bitter gift. Turned amid the screams of a collapsing empire, by a lover whose final embrace bound him to guilt's endless vigil, he had risen through wars that painted the realms in shades of betrayal. The Crimson Throne was his atonement, a bulwark against the pureblood savagery, enforcing edicts of restraint that sparked rebellions in the shadowed courts. Solitary in his ethics, he had watched allies fall to political daggers, their whispers of weakness fueling border clashes where immortal legions tested mortal resolve. "Because in your eyes, I see the reflection of my own fracture," he replied, his voice a low timbre that resonated through the chamber like the hum of velvet against skin. "You stand at the precipice, Dhampir without clan, and in that limbo you embody the choice I made long ago, not to die, but to endure the weight of what remains." He turned from the mirror, its gilded frame catching the candle's flicker, illuminating tapestries of faded battles, vampiric silhouettes clashing against human banners, thorns of treachery piercing regal forms. The air between them hummed with tension, textured by the soft crackle of flames and the subtle shift of his cloak. black velvet whispering secrets of nights spent in solitary contemplation. Isolde's fingers closed around the ring, the thorns piercing deeper. A ritual of self-inflicted penance that drew blood in slow, warm beads. The metallic tang mingled with the chamber's musty intimacy, grounding her as visions assailed her once more. Unbidden glimpses of a shared eternity, his wrist bared in offering, her lips parting to seal a bond that could heal or consume. Outside, the mist-shrouded garden stirred with unseen movement. The envoy from House Thorn melted into the gloom, his cloak blending with the fog like a specter evading moonlight. In his gloved hand, a sealed parchment bore the weight of impending war. Accounts of the king's kneel before the clanless half-breed, fodder for the pureblood council's fury. Thorn's lords, exiled schemers from Victor's unification campaigns, plotted in distant spires of obsidian and bone, their alliances with rogue mortal warlords promising a conflagration that would redraw the borders in rivers of blood. Betrayal was their creed, a philosophical perversion of immortality's promise, eternity not as redemption, but as dominion unchained. The envoy's footsteps crunched on gravel, fading into the night, while thunder rumbled low, a harbinger of storms yet to break. Within the castle's labyrinth, Victor guided Isolde deeper, their path winding through corridors lined with suits of armor, dented relics from clashes where he had spared the vanquished, earning both loyalty and loathing. The walls seemed to lean in, heavy with the scent of aged oak and distant hearth smoke, each step a cadence of introspection. The nobles prepare daughters for crowns forged in deception, he said, pausing at a narrow archway that opened to a balcony overlooking the storm-lashed cliffs. Wind whipped through, carrying the brine of the sea and the chill bite of spray, extinguishing the torch behind them in a hiss of steam. But you offer no illusion. Your suffering is real, a beauty the immortals have forgotten, the raw edge that makes existence profound. Isolde leaned against the balustrade, the stone cool and rough under her palms, her gown fluttering like a banner in surrender. The fever rose within her, a tidal wave of heat that made her vision swim, revealing flashes of Ilara's pale face in the hall below, the lady's disillusioned eyes pleading for a mercy that echoed her own. Ilara, abandoned by health and hope, represented the mortal coil Isolde both envied and pitied, a life finite yet untainted by eternal hunger. Suffering is no gift, she countered, her tone laced with tragic sensuality, the wind tousling her dark hair like a lover's insistent fingers. It is the curse of my blood, pulling me toward your world while the death that shadows us all whispers of release. The invisible specter of mortality hovered, palpable in the gale, a reminder that every choice teetered on oblivion's brink. Victor's hand found her shoulder, a touch both gentle and commanding, his coolness a balm against her fevered skin. In that moment, revelation bloomed, a ritual unspoken, as he drew her close, the space between them narrowing to the intimacy of shared breath. "Then let it be our redemption," he murmured, his lips brushing her temple, igniting a spark that raced through her like liquid fire. She resisted, rationalizing it as the hybrid's folly, yet her body yielded. The ring's thorns forgotten in the surge of inevitability. Their lips met in the wind's howl, a kiss textured with salt and shadow, blood and velvet, a seal on the dilemma that now bound them, to embrace this love, risking the wars it would unleash or retreat into isolation's cold embrace. As they parted, breathless, the balcony's edge revealed a flicker in the distance, torches snaking through the mist, Thorn's vanguard approaching under cover of night. The political web tightened, betrayal's thorns poised to strike. Isolde's eyes met Victor's, the choice crystallizing. Surrender to this transformative curse, or watch eternity claim them both in flames. The wind howled louder, carrying the first cries of alarm from the watchtowers as the night fractured into the prelude of war. The wind's savage howl tore through the balcony like a dirge from the cliffs below, carrying the acrid tang of salt and smoke as the first torches pierced the mist-shrouded veil. Isolde's lips still burned from Victor's kiss, a brand of velvet and shadow that lingered like the aftertaste of forbidden wine, her fevered blood surging in defiant rhythm against the chill of his touch. She pulled away, the thorn-etched ring swaying against her chest, its pricks a fading sting amid the roar of her pulse. The world narrowed to the electric space between them, yet the cries from the watchtowers shattered the intimacy, sharp as shattered crystal, alarms of invasion, the prelude to war uncoiling like a serpent from the night. Victor's obsidian eyes flicked to the horizon, where the snaking line of flames advanced, House Thorn's vanguard emerging from the fog like wraiths summoned by betrayal. His hand tightened on her arm, not in possession, but in the instinctive shield of one who had weathered centuries of such treacheries. The velvet of his cloak billowed, brushing her like a whisper of eternity's weight, as he drew her back through the archway into the corridor's dim embrace. Torchlight flickered erratically along the walls, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters fleeing the encroaching dawn of conflict. "They come for the throne," he said, his voice a low rumble, textured with the gravel of ancient resolve, fueled by the whispers of my weakness. This choice, this kneel before you. Isolde's breath came in shallow gasps, the fever clawing higher within her, a hybrid torment that blurred the line between passion's heat and illness's decay. She rationalized the kiss as a momentary lapse, a philosophical illusion born of shared solitude, the king's ethical vigil mirroring her own fractured existence, tempting her to bridge the abyss she had long navigated alone. At 25, her life was a tapestry of rejection. The border hamlet's exile after her fangs betrayed her in delirium, the vampire elder's false sanctuary that ended in exploitation during a skirmish where her visions foretold an ambush too late to save her companions. She desired redemption, yes, a tether to the light her human half craved. But love was the ultimate curse, inevitable yet resisted, for it demanded surrender to the shadows that defined her. The ring's thorns had drawn blood anew during their embrace, a warm trickle now cooling against her skin, its metallic scent mingling with the corridor's musty oak and the distant clamor of armored feet. They moved swiftly through the labyrinthine halls, the castle awakening to chaos. Servants' hurried steps echoing on flagstone, the clang of drawn steel from the armory. Alara Voss appeared at a junction, her crimson gown disheveled, face ashen under the pallor of her wasting sickness. The fever that ravaged her, born of the moor's poisoned mists, sapping her vitality in relentless waves, had her leaning against the wall, breaths ragged as if each one cost a fragment of her soul. Abandoned by hope and health, the 28-year-old noblewoman had sought only survival in this court of deceptions. Her father's war-scarred ambitions, a chain she could not break. The borders. They breached the outer walls, she gasped, her eyes wide with the disillusionment of one who had glimpsed the fragility of mortal alliances. Lord Voss rallies the guards, but Thorn's spies, "Your kneel has ignited this, sire. Mercy for the Dhampir, but what of us?" Victor's gaze met hers, compassion etching deeper lines across his eternal face, the guilt of a king who had spared villages in past wars, only to watch political thorns fester into full rebellion. Born in Rome's dying throes, turned by a lover's desperate right amid imperial collapse, he had forged the Crimson Throne from restraint, negotiating truces that purebloods decried as dilution. Every immortal he knew was once someone who chose not to die, yet that choice bred isolation, a solitude now fracturing under the weight of this newfound pull toward Isolde. "Mercy is not selective, Lady Alara," he replied, his tone steady as the slow drip of candle wax. nor is redemption. Thorn seeks dominion, not unity. Their betrayal a perversion of eternity's promise. Stand with us, and your suffering becomes the light that pierces their shadow. The corridor trembled with the first distant clash of steel, the air thickening with the coppery promise of blood and the low thunder of war drums from the cliffs. Isolde's hand found Victor's, unbidden, the contact a spark that raced through her veins, battling the illness's chill grip. They descended a spiral stair into the castle's undercroft, a vaulted chamber lit by iron sconces whose flames guttered like hesitant breaths. Here, amid crates of ancient tomes and racks of shadowed weaponry, Victor paused before a low altar of obsidian, its surface etched with runes of binding, relics from his Roman origins, symbols of choices sealed in blood. The death that shadowed all hovered invisible, a palpable specter in the confined space, whispering of ends deferred and beginnings forged in peril. "This is the ritual heart of Eldridge," he murmured, guiding her forward, the cool stone underfoot textured with the grit of centuries. "Where oaths are made, not broken. Thorn's advance buys us moments, but the war they unleash demands a stand." His fingers traced the runes, igniting a faint glow that bathed them in crimson light, mirroring the bead of blood on Isolde's skin. Revelation dawned then, intimate and inexorable. A moment of choice, as he extended his wrist, the pale vein beneath pulsing with the slow rhythm of immortality. "Drink, Isolde. Bind with me, not as thrall, but as equal. Your hybrid fire tempers my guilt. Together, we redeem the fractures of both worlds, refuse, and eternity claims us in isolation's grave." She stared at the offering, the thorn-etched ring heavy against her heart, its pricks a ritual echo of this greater one. Rationalization flooded her, the kiss on the balcony a fever dream, this bond a curse that would drag her deeper into the immortal wars, betraying the human warmth she clung to. Yet the inevitability burned, philosophical and sensual, love as transformation, suffering's beauty alchemized into strength. The fever peaked, vision swirling of battles shared, Alara's frail form bolstered by their alliance, the noble's daughters spared the altar of deception. Her lips parted, resistance crumbling like mist before dawn, and she leaned in, fangs grazing his skin in a tender pierce. Blood flowed, rich and cool as moonlight on velvet, sealing the vow in a surge of shared essence, redemption's blade cutting through the night. The chamber's glow intensified, runes pulsing like a heartbeat as the undercroft's door burst open above. Alara's cry echoed down the stairs. They breached the hall, thorns blades at the noble's throats. Victor's eyes met Isolde's, transformed now by the ritual's fire, but the cliffhanger loomed in the rising din. Their bond ignited a beacon for war's fury, and in the chaos, would Ilara's plea for mercy become the first casualty of love's defiant choice? The drums swelled, steel sang, and the shadows closed in, demanding the price of eternity's embrace. The undercroft's crimson glow pulsed like a wounded heart, the obsidian runes thrumming with the fresh seal of their bond, Isolde's lips still tingling from the cool rush of Victor's blood. A velvet elixir that chased the fever's shadows from her veins, if only for a breath. She staggered back, the thorn-etched ring now warm against her skin, its pricks transformed from torment to talisman, blood mingling with his in an invisible thread that wove their essences. The air hung heavy with the metallic tang of the ritual and the distant clamor of steel on stone, Alara's cry echoing down the spiral stair like a fracture in the night. Isolde's emerald eyes met Victor's, transformed yet turbulent, the hybrid fire within her now tempered by his ancient restraint. A philosophical fusion that whispered of eternities shared, not stolen. He rose, fluid as shadow uncoiling, his hand lingering on her arm, a touch that grounded her amid the surge of newfound strength, the illness's grip loosening like mist before flame. Centuries of guilt etched his features, softened now by the revelation of this choice, not domination, but partnership, redeeming the fractures of his solitary reign. Born in Rome's crumbling forums, turned amid the acrid smoke of betrayal, Victor had chosen eternity to atone for a lover's desperate plea, forging a throne from ethical thorns that purebloods twisted into weapons. Wars had scarred his path, border clashes where he spared mortal legions, only to face rebellion from within. House Thorn's schemers embodying the perversion of immortality as endless conquest. "The bond holds," he murmured, his voice a low caress textured with the grit of impending battle. "But Thorn's blades demand we wield it." Footsteps thundered above, the castle's bones shuddering as invaders breached the hall. Isolde felt the pull of their connection, a sensory tide, his cool resolve anchoring her warmth, her visions sharpening to pierce the gloom. Flashes of cloaked figures swarming the grand chamber, nobles scattering like wilted petals under the onslaught. She rationalized the intimacy as survival's necessity, resisting the deeper curse of love's inevitability. Yet her body moved in sync with his, ascending the stairs in a cadence of shared purpose. The death that shadowed them all loomed larger now, invisible specter in the flickering sconces, its whisper a reminder that redemption was no shield against the blade's kiss. They emerged into chaos, the corridor awash in torchlight and screams, tapestries aflame, their ancient battles mocking the present fray. Ilara huddled against a pillar, her crimson gown torn, face slick with sweat and fear, the wasting sickness carving hollows deeper in her cheeks. At 28, she was a vessel of disillusionment, abandoned by a mother to fever's grasp, her father's war-ravaged ambitions chaining her to this gilded doom. The moor's poisoned mists had stolen her vigor, leaving breaths shallow as autumn leaves. Yet in this moment her eyes blazed with a fragile defiance. "They've taken the dais," she gasped, clutching a fallen candelabrum like a scepter, its wax dripping hot onto her skin. "Lord Voss fights, but Thorn's lord, pale as death, eyes like frost, demands your head for the Dhampir's taint." Victor's gaze swept the melee, guards clashing with Thorn's vanguard, blades singing through the air, heavy with the scent of sweat and singed velvet. The rival lord, Elias Thorn, stood at the hall's heart, his form gaunt and imperious, clad in armor etched with severance runes, a pureblood exile whose political betrayals had ignited half the realm's fires. Banished for slaughtering truce envoys, he embodied the immortal's shadowed underbelly, his desire dominion unchecked by guilt. "The kneel was your undoing, Victor." Elias's voice boomed, resonant as cracking ice, his pale eyes locking on Isolde with predatory gleam. "A half-breed whore unravels the crimson throne. We purge the weakness tonight, borders redrawn in pure blood." Isolde's fangs ached, the bond amplifying her senses. The coppery promise of spilled life, the low hum of Victor's pulse syncing with hers. She stepped forward, the ring's thorns a faint pulse against her chest, symbolic anchor in the storm. Rationalization fled, the love she had resisted bloomed inexorable, a redemptive force transforming fear into fury. "Weakness?" she countered, her voice husky with the ritual's afterglow carrying the intimate timbre of one reborn. "You chain eternity to savagery, Elias. We choose light in shadow, humanity's spark to temper your frost." The hall erupted. Thorn's forces surged, but Victor moved like liquid night, his blade, a relic from Roman legions, hilt wrapped in faded gold, flashing in arcs that felled assailants with merciful precision. Isolde joined the fray, her hybrid grace a blur, fangs and claws rending armor, her visions guiding strikes to disarm rather than destroy. Ilara, emboldened, swung the candelabrum, its flames scattering shadows, her frail strikes landing with the desperation of the forsaken. Blood sprayed, warm and slick, staining marble like scattered roses, the air textured with grunts and the wet thud of bodies. Victor reached Elias amid the press, their clash a philosophical duel, restraint against rage, redemption's blade parrying betrayal's thrust. Isolde shielded Elara from a lunging guard, the impact jarring her bones. But the bond's strength surged, healing the strain in a rush of cool fire. "Fight for your mercy," she urged, pulling the noblewoman to her feet, their hands clasping in shared vulnerability, the Dhampir's fevered warmth meeting Elara's chill frailty. In that touch, a revelation crystallized. Love's curse extended beyond the eternal pair, weaving redemption through mortal threads, choices rippling to transform suffering's beauty into collective light. Elias fell, not to death's finality. Victor's ethic forbade it, but to binding chains, his snarls echoing defeat as guards hauled him to the vaults. The hall fell silent, save for ragged breaths and the patter of dying rain, candles guttering low. Victor sheathed his blade, turning to Isolde, his obsidian eyes alight with quiet triumph, the guilt's weight lifted by their union. Yet as dawn's first pallor crept through the windows, a messenger burst in, seals from distant mortal lords, alliances fracturing under rumors of the Dhampir queen. Wars simmered beyond the gates, political thorns poised to bloom anew. Isolde leaned into Victor, the ring's warmth a vow etched in blood. Her resistance fully yielded to the inevitable. Eternity not as isolation, but as shared vigil. Elara watched, her illness's shadow lingering, but a spark of hope flickering in her eyes, the first crack in disillusionment's armor. The death that haunted them receded, not vanquished, but chosen against, in love's redemptive embrace. Yet in the fragile peace, the dilemma lingered. Could their bond heal the realm's divides, or would betrayal's echoes ignite a greater conflagration, testing the cost of transcendence? If this story has already captured you, leave a like. It helps the voices of those who chose eternity reach more hearts. Subscribe if you believe mercy can resurrect even the damned.